Musical Talk, the UK independent musical theatre podcast.
Hello, welcome to Musical Talk. My name is Nick Hudson. I'm sat here for the second time appearing on the show. It's been a while, but we're welcoming Jeremy Sams. Hello, Jeremy.
Hi there.
Composer, lyricist, director, book writer, pianist, orchestrator, translator, everything. We had you on last when you were talking about L'Amour, was it? At the Royal Academy.
Academy of Music, that's right.
And
the other day I was introduced as, I did something with George Stiles, and George said, "This is Jeremy who's worked with everybody." And I had it, once. Which seems to be the shape of it. Yeah.
And never again.
Never again.
Before we started, when I arrived in your lovely home here, so there's a quote that has come up in the news today. Do you want to share what that was?
Yeah, just a little thing. Michael Billington in the Guardian talking about Andrew Lloyd Webber, whose birthday is tomorrow.
It's 40 years old.
Again. And he was saying that nobody has made the team of, in fact, he said precisely Tim Rice, but he meant Andrew and whoever. No one's made that imprint, is his word, on British musicals. And he said, apart from Stiles and Drewe. But basically he said, if there's a talent pool, then Andrew's the only swimming instructor, as it were. And people have taken issue with that. And I noticed on Mark Shenton and others saying, this isn't right. But I wonder if it's actually wrong. Because you look at America and see the proliferation of new musicals of all sorts, and including some real astonishing masterpieces, some of which, even more astonishing, are commercial successes. And that richness is not really, purely factually, I don't know if one makes West End Transfer an index of success, but Michael's point was good about leaving an imprint. And I was wondering, and I'd love to know your opinion, why that's true in the UK and not in the US.
An imprint on whom?
Well, on other musicals.
Okay.
I mean, it's very much the tradition in America of, as Newton said, the shoulders of giants. So Sondheim doesn't exist without Roger Hammerstein, and nor does Jerry Herman without Frank Lesser, etc., etc. But everyone's...
And our dear Foss would argue none of these would exist without Gilbert and Sullivan.
Yeah, well, Sondheim would dispute that. He has no truck with Gilbert.
How dare he?
He has no truck with Gilbert and Sullivan of any sort. I do. I was brought up on Gilbert and Sullivan. I mean, certainly, operetta is, if we go purely historically, but I've got a feeling that Victor Herbert, who sort of begins everything, doesn't owe so much to GNS as to Lehar and Viennese operetta and Strauss and so on.
Grand Operas of Europe, which...
Yeah, so
Les Mis
Strauss, in The Merry Widow, seems to have a bigger influence on early American musicals than the Macabre.
Black Crook as well?
Yes, that mysterious, much-quoted piece. So, and in England, and it's just true, and I wonder why, that doesn't seem to be the way. The hits, the musical hits that do exist, which have had legs, as it were, I'm setting aside Andrew, who's a sort of phenomenon unto himself. Yeah. His success is...
He's a brand, isn't he?
Well, yes. But it's interesting. You say a brand, but a brand that... it's more like Virgin. He has many, many different manifestations. So the man who wrote School of Rock also wrote Phantom of the Opera, and there's no notable similarity between the two. This is why I admire Andrew so much, not just because I go to his birthday party tomorrow, but...
Yes, you've said that already, Jeremy.
Yes, I'm not alone at this party, I assure you.
You're in 5,000 of his closest friends.
But he's made an impact on Broadway, no question.
Yeah.
After he's introduced Superstar, the plethora of rock musicals and so on. But he hasn't really made that impression on the UK because there isn't really that movement. And the British musicals, which I particularly admire and love, are very often outlying exceptional examples than part of a Shoulders of Giants movement.
What do you think is some of the greatest British shows that have come out of recent times that aren't Andrew Lloyd Webber or Cameron Mackintosh?
I think we'll probably start with Oliver, but Oliver is a very strange piece. it's not really a West End musical. It's
No.
it's a Stratford piece. It's almost a workers' collective Joe Littlewood event, and actually, if you try and put it in dramaturgically, it limps a bit as a piece on its own, in spite of people's efforts. But I would put that down there. Particularly favourite of mine, Blood Brothers, which again is just a one-off. Remarkable work, and what's great about Blood Brothers is the dramaturgy. I think it's one of the very best books you'll find in any musical, because it's written by playwrights.
Many would argue that the book is stronger than the songwriting.
Yes, but they don't seem to be a different thing.
No.
Mainly because the guy wrote the book.
Willie Russell, isn't it?
Willie Russell wrote both. But actually, and I saw it, I used to see it all the time, but when I last saw it, because I was very interested in dramaturgy, is how the ideas of Act 2 are set up in Act 1, and how props are placed, and how guns are mentioned, and how, the scene of the shooting gallery, we end up shooting in Act 2. And this sort of really Hammerstein-style dramaturgy, or the well-made play, actually. Think of, Terence Rattigan, something like that, which is a bizarre person to think of in connection with Willie Russell. But actually, his plays, all his plays, I think, are beautifully made, beautifully structured, and with hints that pay off and so on. So I put Blood Brothers up there. Okay, we're not mentioning Andrew. I would put, again, a complete outlier and never to be repeated, London Road. I think there's nothing like London Road, nor will there ever be.
That shook things up a bit, didn't it?
It did, but of course it will never be the part of a movement. It is the ne plus ultra, as they used to say in ancient Rome. It's the last word in musicals of that time, because it's the first word in musicals of that kind. People talk about or have attempted verbatim musicals a bit.
Committee, of course.
Committee, but not like that. Not actually taking the geography of the human voice when it goes up and down and making that into music. I thought that was an amazing piece.
I think that's an interesting point, because the National is, they did that show. Would any commercial producer pick up London Road? If you as a writer said, I've got this musical, there's no rhymes, the music's a bit strange, it's about these recorded conversations with people that were affected by the prostitute's murder in
Ipswich. Yeah.
It seems that we're very lucky, and I say this a lot on the show, to have the National that will pick up shows like this. But you said before we started, is it a good sign that the government are the only people that will fund new British musical theatre writing?
Yeah, that brings up, significantly, no commercial producer, I don't think, did take up London Road as a commercial proposition.
Until the National made it a hit, and then it had a film, and it transferred, and it's coming back, isn't it?
Is it really? I do hope so, because it's a wonderful...
No, sorry, Warhorse is coming back.
Warhorse is certainly coming back, yes. But, of course, here's the other thing that you cannot get away from musicals, and that's finance. I've said it before, but I work a lot in opera. Opera is a way of spending money, and musicals are a way of making money. It's in their DNA that it's a proposed idea of making your money back. And now we all think of musicals as artworks nowadays, but that's quite a new idea. Sondheim still thinks of Sweeney Todd as a failure because it failed to make back its investment on Broadway.
It's a cutthroat business.
Hey! It's dog eat dog, you're absolutely right.
Razor sharp word.
And so since you mentioned the pitch for London Road, it doesn't sound very far from the pitch for Sweeney Todd, actually.
No.
But actually, so is that an index of success? It is in the DNA of musicals that to make its money back and not to run at a loss, because it's a very, 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 very expensive business, as I'm sure you know. Just to run a musical and to employ musicians and all the other costs that come with it, which sometimes producers who don't quite get these things don't quite understand. From rehearsal piano players to rehearsal rooms to synth programmers, the expenses... Every
single person needs to live.
Yes, it's a massive, massive, massive budget. And if it runs somewhere that doesn't, we don't make money every week, you mentioned Amour. Amour failed to make its money back in its first 2 weeks, and that was it. It was taken off. People are sentimental about these things. That's why workshops, readings, etc., are so vital to producers, but also to performers, in that, you want to find out if your building is going to work on paper before you build it.
It's interesting at workshops. I think you said to me once, workshops are great because you get to show off your work, but they're also risky because you get to show off your work, and it's the only chance you get to have people in the room that are there to like it. But it's also, we think a workshop is to show what's great about the piece, but it also shows what's really bad about the piece.
Yes, you have to decide what your workshop is for. And the best workshops I've been involved with are the ones that have shown the shortcomings of the piece. But that doesn't attract investors.
No.
I think,
You need previews for workshops, and then you need to have the opening night for the workshop.
I had the same thing with my son, who has a complicated medical history, and we would meet with doctors or therapists and that sort of thing, and my son would say, do I have to be sane on this meeting or crazy in this meeting?
Somewhere between the two.
Yeah, but actually it's a good question, and similarly a workshop is the best value you can get out of it is to decide what doesn't work. And the nightmare version of it, I've got a friend who's happening to right now, doing a workshop that doesn't work, and the guys with the money turn up and say, it's brilliant, but we open next year or next week. You think, no, we can't open on this. So there's a great deal of wishful thinking happens. But if you think about it, the expense on workshops and readings...
I know.
I went to one the other day of this show called Myth, which is happening, which my friend Arlene Phillips is involved with. They've spent as much on the workshops as I've spent on actual shows. It's great, it's fantastic, and that is quite useful for producers, particularly those who can't quite imagine what a production would look like if it was
Where
fully...
does the line end, where does it stop being called a workshop and just be called a show?
It stops with money.
Right.
It stops with how much money you're prepared to spend on it. And there comes a point when, if you're spending as much on a workshop in which an audience doesn't pay, you might as well get an audience paying, and then you've got a show. That's the difference.
So going back to the original point, do you think... I mean, we're massive fans of Georgian Style and Anthony Drewe here. They're...
I was about to mention them as well.
Yes. Go on. What
Well, I mean, it's interesting, though, because I love... And also Howard Goodall, what he does. I think Howard is the great melodist of...
But he doesn't like musicals, does he? I mean,
he adores musicals.
He said this very openly, that I don't like musicals. And
really?
I use quotations here.
Well...
He writes very well for someone who claims not to like them.
I think he's being...
I think he must love them.
He's being capricious, I think, there. Yes, no, Howard is an amazingly beautiful writer, particularly, as I say, a melodist. Wonderful melodist. George and Ant's, their work is gorgeous and witty and beautiful. I don't know if it's made an imprint in the sense that people will want to emulate them. Maybe people do want to emulate them, I don't know. But anyway, Michael said that apart from Stiles and Drewe, Andrew Lloyd Webber's had no real people who've made that equal imprint on the...
No, but, I mean, you think of musical theatre, I grew up in the 80s, as did you, Jeremy, 1980s for me, and the mega musical, it is British musical theatre. For one that didn't grow up with Oliver, this is the next thing.
What British musical theatre do you mean? Les Mis?
Les Mis, Cats, Phantom.
Yes.
But and that was the first show that put London theatre on the map as far as the Americans are concerned. Yes. It's funny, if you watch the PBS Julie Andrews Broadway American, they glaze over the British invasion so quickly. It's almost as though they're a bit bitter of us coming over and having the
Yes, come over here, show us how to do what we do best. I don't blame them. Interestingly, I think what made that particular boom, and I'm sort of keeping Andrew out of this at the moment, is actually directors.
Hal Prince, Trevor Nunn.
Hal Prince, Nick Heitner, and now Phyllida Lloyd, Matthew Walshus. And what's amazing is that the quality of directors who come from mainstream opera and theatre. And that wasn't always the case, and there have been many times, when Peter Brook tries to do a musical, or Peter Hall tries to do a musical, Via Galactica, anybody, where that doesn't necessarily work out. But there is a populist trend, or part of people like Trevor, Nick Heitner particularly, who's one of the most intellectual and well-read and erudite people I know, but has a showbiz freak in him as long as your arm, you know.
Well, it's like, I mean, my favourite director is Matthew Warchus,
yes.
And you mentioned him. I think I'm getting this quote wrong, but it was along the lines of he gets as excited about a new play as he does a new bit of lighting technology.
Mm-hmm.
He loves the theatrics
yes.
of it all, and he knows how to put on a show. He knows what people like shiny things, and that's...
Yes, interesting you've mentioned Matthew, because we talk about workshops and so on. Matthew's unique amongst all the directors I know, that he does most of his real work. Actually, Stephen Daldry, another one. Stephen Daldry, amazing director. And actually, what's caused the British invasion of New York are these productions by British directors. Hal Prince is the American exception. What Matthew does, and Stephen does it a bit as well, which is I've often wanted to have the courage to do, which is to do all your work in preview. To think of your first preview in the same way that a film director would think of a rough assemblage, which then is, this is what we've got, how are we going to...
The rush.
Yeah. How can we make this into... Because Matthew feels, and he's absolutely right, that there's no reality apart from the reality in the theatre
with an audience.
Absolutely right. And I often think this, that a rehearsal room is a fool's paradise. Everything's great in a rehearsal room, and everything's great in reading.
And opening nights.
Well, yes, but often because one's made it so in previews, and what Matthew does, which is takes some courage, is to chuck things out in preview. Philip did it on Mamma Mia, and Stephen did it on Billy Elliot, where he worked them into the ground until the very first until the first night. No freezing the show, you know. We keep working, and he would say, "Do you want a hit or not? Do you want a year's work or not? Come on, guys." Which I think is amazing, and people. It's big sculpting, that is. That really is like Louise Bourgeois. That's big sculpting.
Do you agree with the statement, I think it's Sondheim, that no musical is written, it's only rewritten?
Yes, it's interesting. It's also true of opera. You know, some of the operas I love, you know, Madame Butterfly exists in several different versions, you know. The reason musicals are rewritten so much is because there's so much money running on it. It's simple as that. You have to get it right. But also, I don't know a musical that isn't also basically a songbook. Sheldon Harnick put out quite recently an album of the cut songs from Fiddler on the Roof, which was longer than the show. We were just talking about it before we started recording. Yeah. You don't know what your show is until you are in your show. So actually, your first numbers sometimes are actually a way into the show. And very often working with writers, I've put a question mark over such and such a number, and people have said, "Oh no, you don't understand. That's the first number I wrote."
It has to stay in the piece.
Yeah, and I'm tempted to say that's my point. Yeah. You know,
I mean, it's interesting. If you were to write a musical, I'm going to do the first song, then the second song, it would get better as the evening goes on, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Your first song would be terrible, and your finale would be the best thing in the world.
Yes, it doesn't quite work like that. I mean, there are exceptions that spring to mind immediately. Take Act One of Sweeney, for example, that Stephen Sondheim sat down and wrote from soup to nuts. He wrote the first 7 or 8 numbers back to back as he went in one, you know...
Evening, probably.
Or certainly one morning. So, you know, that was how that was done. So people do things differently. To do that, though, like Stephen Sondheim, you have to be... And here's the tricky thing, to be a master of your craft for decades.
Did he have 3 months' worth of meetings with Hal Prince first, or did
I very much doubt it. I'm sure they have supper in Saudis, you know. But actually, you know, and he probably run a scheme, but probably some simple question like, what is this show about? A question that many writers of new musicals signally haven't asked themselves.
Or maybe Hugh Wheeler was in the room as well.
Yeah, he was in the room, and he says of that he would have actually, what he really wanted to was write it without dialogue at all. In some ways, because it very nearly is without dialogue. In some ways, he wishes he had.
And the worst prize in London is practically verbatim from Christopher Bond's play, isn't it?
Exactly. Well, that's how he writes his stuff. He takes a book scene, or even asks James Lapine to write a scene,
Dialogue.
write a speech.
Yeah.
Write a speech, that person might say. The obvious example is the beginning of Sunday Part with George, where it's been preserved, Dot's original monologue, which is pretty much free association, stream of consciousness, bias stream in this case, actually becomes the first number, which is a very good way of doing it. But I'm going to say it again, if you've got the years under your belt, actually this morning I was watching, I'm very fond of, in spite of his present problems, Louis C.K., the stand-up. And online there's a few clips of him 30 years ago doing stand-up. And you think, you've learnt that craft, which, and this is the craft, looks like you're making shit up.
Yeah. It's like watching a jazz pianist drunk. They know what they're doing.
Yeah, that's right. As long as they can stay on the piano stool.
Yeah, well, it doesn't even matter.
That's right. But that's deep knowledge and deep practice. And it seems to me that that's something that people don't do enough of. Firstly, the knowledge. It's not just taxi drivers, but musical theatre writers have to do the knowledge.
Which leads me on to my next topic of discussion. Do we think the art of lyric writing is dead?
It's interesting. I'm just working on a show I'm going to do later in the year, at least I think I am, by William Finn and James Lapine.
Get funding.
If I can get funding. Well, that of course, that's the issue. Musicals are expensive. And William Finn, who I admire very much indeed, is absolutely rigorous about his rhyming. And so is Jason Robert Brown. So is Stephen Sondheim, so is Oscar Hammerstein, and so are all the blue-ribboned writers, if you like, in the American theatre tradition. The reason things changed is when...
The Brits got in the way.
Well, when rock music actually got in the way. Because I love a perfect rhyme. In fact, if the point of making a rhyme... Here's the difference between a rock song and a theatre piece. A theatre piece is being performed in real time to an audience, and what you say has to fall clearly and sometimes amusingly, sometimes touchingly, but it has to happen
in real time.
In real time.
As is the difference between lyric and poetry, as Sondheim says.
Yes, that's right. A lyric, you could read it like a poem, and you could.
But you're listening to a song.
You could set a poem,
you
yes.
can read in your own.
And that's why Stephen Sondheim is so against poetry. I'm doing a thing on Bernstein quite soon, and he came in to work on West Side Stories, but Bernstein, in fact, had written a lot of lyrics, which Sondheim says were just poetry. Yes. And it's all a question of intention. So the difference between a rock song or something off an album and a song that's in a theatre as part of a story with an audience is a difference between, you're not looking at a painting. Something's actually happening here, much more than So if I'm listening to a rock thing on an album, the work that's being done is being done by me as an audience member with my ears and my brain. But actually, in a theatre, the work that's coming is coming from the stage and hitting the audience, and our brains, our synaptic reaction comes back. And where those two meet, in the same way that cold and warm fronts in weather meet, you get rain, but you get a show where we coming to it and us coming to them meet. So I would maintain that a lyric in a musical has a different purpose. However, what happened in the 70s is that music from rock music that had quite a different genesis, from blues, from rock and roll, and so on, in which words were much, much looser, often because they were written quickly and drunk.
All made up.
And actually the smartness, the clarity, the purpose of a rhyme, and I'm saying rhyme, to hit in the space and tell a story is not there. And what happens, it seems to me, is when rock music was imported, on its back, hitching a ride, as it were, comes a rock lyric. And because that belongs to that genre. And sometimes it seems odd when you hear rock music that has got perfect rhymes in. Stephen Sondheim wrote a couple of rock songs, there's a great one called Water Under the Bridge, which I love, which Liza Minnelli sings, which you'll find on YouTube, perfect rhyming. And it seems a little bit odd not to rhyme dream with scene in that thing, which for me jars like a bum note jars. And also means that no work has gone into it. I just talked about stand-up comics. A stand-up with a tour and work will get the wording of a joke down to every preposition right, so it pings an audience and slays them. And if you get the words in the wrong order, it doesn't have the same reaction. And that's called work. And the work that has to go into a lyric, I always hear if someone's rhyming dream with scene and other things much more egregious than that.
Does it bother you in pop? So it doesn't bother you in pop songs?
No.
Because you're expecting it?
I'm not. It does bother me because I'm a silly purist queen, but there's sort of... yes, it does, but it seems to me to belong to the genre, which brings us neatly to Hamilton. Because people always say to me, you must listen to Eminem because the rhymes are so brilliant and inventive. And I listen to Eminem.
Well, the assonance is brilliant. So
exactly right. Yes, and it's playing word games and word salads and assonances and alliterations and all sorts of tricks like that. But it doesn't rhyme like Roger and Hammerstein.
I mean, there's a lyric I like that he did, I'm not Mr. NSYNC, I'm not what your friends think.
Yes.
Which, like Umbilical and Miracle in Matilda by Tim Minchin, it works, but it doesn't work if you sit down
I would say more work needed there.
Yeah.
There are perfectly good rhymes for Miracle. Lyrical and satirical are two of them. And Umbilical, if I could think of them immediately, probably as well. But that goes thunk to me. And I think the perfect rhyme would be better. Then Matilda would be a massive hit and make everyone a great deal of money. Because it doesn't matter. But it's interesting because I think it does matter. And it'll always sound to me and people like me like a first draft. Yeah. Probably because it is a first draft. And it shouldn't be congratulated. You might say, OK, you've got the word miracle. Look for a couple more rhymes.
Mirrorball he uses.
Right. That doesn't rhyme at all.
But yeah, so that's what I'm saying. But you kind of forgive Tim Minchin because it's the world of Roald Dahl and it's all a bit off angle.
That makes no sense to me at all. Lizzie Brickers wouldn't do that on a Roald Dahl show.
No.
It makes no sense. I don't see why the activity of an audience should be one of forgiving or criticising or rewriting or fixing. What we want is this thing to hit us between the eyes. But I do think that and it also depends who you admire. The writers who I admire, who I've mentioned, don't do that.
They would strive for the perfect.
Of course. Yeah. It's called work. It's called work.
Well, it's called the craft as well.
Exactly right. And Sondheim says there's nothing better than writing your first draft lyric and then on a bit of yellow legal pad and then spending the next 2-3 hours.
3 years.
Yeah, honing it, because that's craft. Otherwise, you'd just be putting your first draft down. And I feel that with a lot of music as well, particularly. Someone has an idea, and this idea was nurtured like a neonate or a fresh kidney of the M25 and brought to the table. We cannot change this thing because it exists or lives.
I mean, we've had Mark Shaman on the show, and when he was working with Trey Parker and Matt Stone doing the South Park movie, they would throw rhymes, hat and cats and all that kind of stuff. And Mark said it just, if you want it to be really, really funny, make it perfect.
Yes.
Because it seems like you've really worked on that.
Why wouldn't you want to?
Because they don't have they're not the musical theatre background.
Yes.
And it shows in Book of Mormon.
Yes. Again, if they could fix those rhymes, it would be a massive hit.
Yeah. Work needed, see me.
Yeah.
But Hamilton,
Well, Hamilton is a really, really, really good example because the musical influences there are many, many, many. But mostly they're from, rap and hip-hop. And that's why the Eminem style of rhyming and so on is there. But for me, Hamilton is a sort of fantastic melting pot of so many different things.
And there'll still be a lyric that will just hit you right between the eyes.
Yeah, and it is full of perfect rhymes.
Yeah.
But actually, the audience is aimed at, and the music they know, which isn't the music I know. Funnily enough, I've got to know a lot of this music from Hamilton.
Yeah.
He wrote this fantastic annotated Hamilton book that shows you the things I've been, listening to all amazing sort of 90s rappers and things like that.
Next week, we're actually having on the Alex Lackamoire, who is the orchestrator.
He is the genius.
Yeah, and I think I don't think he gets enough credit because it's Lin-Manuel Miranda's Hamilton. It's like
he is an amazing genius. Funnily enough, because of the access of the influx of, as it were, rock music, and Miranda isn't a sophisticated composer, but Alex sure as hell is.
Yeah.
He's amazing, and his work you can hear all loads of other musicals as well.
He's the Glenn Kelly to Mel Brooks, I think.
That's right.
And
actually, in this country, the people like, we mentioned Pinocchio, Martin Lowe, Chris Nightingale, Martin Koch, those
background people that
deserve
much more credit.
Actually writing the shows, because what Elton John came up with in Billy Elliot was a few songs on a CD. But to turn that into finales, into linking music, that's a real skill, and there's a whole raft of...
It's the more enjoyable puzzle, I think.
Yes, but that wasn't a role that ever existed in the golden years of Broadway. You have an orchestrator, you'd have Robert Russell Bennett or Don Walker or Jonathan Tunick, but that's something quite different. The person who will actually turn rock music into theatre music. And that's what happens in Matilda, that's what happens in Billy Elliot, that's what happens in loads of these shows, that rock music is turned into theatre music because it's something different. But the lyrics...
We had a lyric doctor as well to come and do the same thing.
Yes, I mean, it's interesting though, I mean, I think that ship has sailed, to be honest. I think people don't hear, younger people particularly, and when I'm working with songwriters, they say, what's wrong with this and this?
It doesn't work.
It doesn't rhyme,
And are they... What's their reaction to that?
Yeah, they look puzzled and make me out to be some sort of purist or killjoy. But
that's a bad thing?
Well, it just all that depends is where you set your bar. As simple as that. If you set it low, you can leap over it any day of the week. Anything can rhyme with anything. You can write 10 songs in a week. But the actual craft of it. And this goes for notes as well as words and harmonies. I feel that first draftism is everywhere. And actually, okay, great, that's your first. Particularly, actually, if people who write on machines.
Don't look at me like that.
No, I now write on machines, but if you've got a piano. You play something, it doesn't sound right, you play it again, you play it again, you play it again. It's not
and also you learn how to play it as well.
It's not stored anywhere. But when I first started working with music on computers, I would put something down, whatever it was, then spend a day trying to add, these are the really primitive days we're talking about, adding timbre and pressure and all colours to that thing, without really asking myself, was this thing worth
3 hours of fiddling around with?
At all. No, it seems to acquire validity by being written by me. And because everything is recorded, everything is forever. Whereas you can't beat. Sondheim talks about listening to Jerome Kern writing All the Things You Are. And Oscar Hammerstein told him, who wrote the lyric for it, that he had to sit next to his office listening to "You are the promised kiss of springtime, springtime, springtime."
Every single note
everything
he was trying.
Hammered out like Michelangelo would hammer out a sculpture, a nose, exactly right. And I do sound very fuddy-duddy here, but there is something to be said for something not coming straight away, looking for it. And even as a composer myself, the feeling, and I had it this morning writing a song, that the chord I want is there.
Somewhere.
I know it's in the piano. I know it's there. I can hear it. I could smell it. I could draw it. But what I can't do is play the fuck out right now. So, but it doesn't mean that I
It's looking for that perfect colour on your palette, isn't it?
Yeah, I know it's there. And sometimes I can't find it, and there we go. But it doesn't mean that I put my first thought in and say, well, this will do.
Sometimes you have the lovely moment when you're composing and you mean to play a chord and your finger goes to the wrong note, and then you come up with something a lot more interesting, which is a lovely creative accident.
What fingers actually do defines a great deal of music. Look at guitar chords. Brazilian guitar chords, for example, are just to do if you put your hand on this shape on that thing, here's the spacing that you have to come out with. I sometimes feel that a lot of music, and particularly recent pop and theatre music, is very much root position. So, here's my left hand with C, and then we go to G, and that's, the fact is that if I'm in C, there's any number of notes that could be my bass note. So more examination is required here.
And do you think that's because musicals are written on guitars nowadays by songwriters, or...?
No, I think they're mostly written on keyboards, and actually most written on machines, yes. I just wonder sometimes if one should shut the machine off. Because the terror then is that you find the lost chord, as Sullivan says, and you can't find it again. But that's why God invented manuscript paper. But then again, that particular skill is also a dying skill. And I remember so many years with my pencil in my mouth and a cigarette in my spare hand, trying to get the damn
set the paper on fire.
The damn thing down on five staves, or sort of one stave with 5 lines before it goes.
I did that at school, and I learnt about lead sheets, and the fact you could just write a melody and do the chords, and it gave me a good chords training. And
these things are open to everyone who writes music. These are not closed books. These are not, and you don't need it. I'm a big Beatles fan, and none of the Beatles could read or write music, but my God, they've got ears, and they also had George Martin, which helps. But they've got amazing ears. And
Chris Nightingale of the Beatles.
Yeah, well, exactly right. Martin and Nightingale, both birds, interestingly, but there we go. But Paul McCartney is always out for an interesting bass line, an interesting spacing. But
then there's the argument that if he doesn't have a formal musical training, his stuff is sometimes a lot more interesting.
Yes.
Because he's not ground down by the fact that it has to be that way.
Yeah. It's a false dichotomy in some ways. There's no version of Paul McCartney that does have a musical training, except what Paul McCartney has is massive influence by his father to a huge amount of music. So he just doesn't know Elvis. He knows Glenn Miller. He knows dance band stuff. One of the first hits was Till There Was You from The Music Man by Meredith Willson. He knows 30s music. He knows...
Is he a musical theatre fan?
Yeah. Well, he's a band fan. So he was brought up. His father was a dance band musician. So that's the music he heard around the house. In fact, but not dissimilarly from anyone of that age in the 50s and 60s.
And it shows in stuff like When I'm 64.
Yeah, of course. And he wrote that when he was very, very young, sort of 15 or 16. Wow. So that's the direct...
Not 64.
No, but it was played to him on his 64th birthday, as you might expect.
Yesterday.
If only.
Or tomorrow, to write to Annie. Do you think he has a musical in him?
No, I don't think he's interested in music telling stories across...
An evening.
An evening, yes.
The same with Billy Joel as well.
Yeah.
Which is a shame.
Well, yes, but actually what's interesting is very often his songs tell stories within the songs. The Eleanor Rigby's and the Piano Man's and they've got a past, present and a future in them. But they aren't songs of that sort. And any attempt to put rock music or pop music into shows is often quite tricky because the songs themselves the story has to stop for the song. And ever since the Roger and Hammerstein revolution, which probably happened a bit earlier than Roger and Hammerstein, actually. Roger and Hart, exactly, and Touch of Showboat. The idea that a person has to be slightly different from the time they finish the song to the time they start it now really is ingrained in storytelling.
Well, now and then we've reversed that entirely when the British sort of came up with the jukebox musical.
Yes.
It's gone back to let's not move the story forward at all and let's have a jolly good night out with some pop songs we know.
Yeah, it's interesting though, because the ones of those that really work for me, and I'd put up there Jersey Boys, which is a show I absolutely venerate. Its construction is completely superb.
I think Our House works really well as well.
Well, Our House, written by a very, very fine playwright, Tim Firth, who practically is the new Willie Russell, I think, and Matthew Walsh's again. So these are professional storytellers are working with this material. Likewise, Philip Lloyd is a wonderful storyteller, and hit that tightrope on Mamma Mia. She does it like nobody else. This idea that, am I taking this seriously, am I not taking it? If you've ever met Philida, you'd know that's very much her style. Does she mean that? Is that a twinkle? I don't know. That's where she lives wonderfully, and she's brilliant at it. The Jersey Boys, though, is superbly put together.
I heard someone say Jersey Boys is a one-act play with songs.
No, it isn't actually. It's a four-act play. And
each story.
It's rigorously structured. 4 seasons, duh.
Yeah.
So each person tells the story, and I'm writing a play right now, and I haven't told the people I'm writing it for. It's based very much on Jersey Boys, only because that structure. Weirdly, you find it also in Michael Frayn's play Benefactors, which is there are 4 people, and each act, as it were, concentrates on and is narrated by that one person. So in Jersey Boys, people crop up at every act and say, it wasn't that bad at all. What happened next was this.
I want to take that concept and have one story told from 4 different points of view. Has that ever been done?
Oh, well, many times, yes. Rashomon, the movie, Japanese movie.
No,
famously.
As a musical, where you have a very complex set of songs going on
in different ways.
Yeah.
Funnily enough, it's one of the highlights of Hamilton.
Yes, that brilliant time when it goes back in time. I thought that was so clever.
That's so sophisticated and brilliantly staged. The idea of the Scarlet Sisters party, and we have it from 2 girls' points of view. Same thing, reverse camera angle. It's a movie trick.
But to see it on stage is much like Our House. But that's different. In fact, it's 2 stories.
Yes.
But
actually, that sort of structure, and the other classy thing about Jersey Boys is they have 6 songs, and each of them is story. And to the point sometimes of just really gussing it up. So when we get, you're so good to be true at the end, the amazingly written build-up to that, where it basically says, if this song hits, then we will survive. If it doesn't, then we won't. I mean, the stakes are put unbelievably high. It talks about the song, I'll play the song, I won't play the song, this is the song, forever and ever and ever and ever. And then eventually the song starts and it goes da-dum, da-da, and we're on our feet. Because it's not just a song, it's life and death. And that's how musicals work. It's not just a song, it's life and death.
But that's a diegetic moment, isn't it? Does that make it, therefore, a play with songs, or is it a musical?
What they've done brilliantly in that particular number and in a couple of other jukebox musicals is to make the diegetic song the book song. And that, if you can...
A non-diegetic song.
Exactly right. And if you can organise that...
That's our favourite word on the podcast.
Or diegetic. Just sound like some halfway between Weight Watchers and Scientology, doesn't it?
Or a 70s prog rock band.
Yes. But actually, no, if you can make the song's going to be there anyway into story...
Like You're Never Fully Dressed Without a Smile in Annie.
Yeah.
With the radio and...
I did years ago Chitty Bang Bang, and those songs, but they were sort of story songs, but they had to be there. And to write the scene that means that you lead to that song is often a trick, but it's a dramaturgical trick, and it isn't really essentially different.
But it's interesting how it's taking the art of musical theatre writing and flipping it on its head, whereas once upon a time one would write songs to link scenes, and now we're writing scenes to link already existing material.
Yes, I actually think that you're describing the same process, a musical dramaturgical process. The only difference is it's compulsory to have Myers Adored You or something like that in Jersey Boys. You have to get to that song.
But it takes the clever person to say, let's make it about the daughter.
Yes. So yes, the smart thing is to make what's already the answer, to build it into the question, if you see what I mean. And it's a trick.
Because people poo-poo on jukebox musicals, and I think they're a brilliant genre of musical theatre. It brings people together in a way that not many musicals do, because you are up. I love We Will Rock You. I thought it was...
We may have to part company there.
No, but people say, oh, the story's so stupid. I thought, yes, you tell me what Bohemian Rhapsody is about and what the hell was going on in
But that show doesn't attempt... Bohemian Rhapsody is performed as an encore on that show.
No, but I think if Freddie Mercury were to sit down and write a story,
yes,
it would be completely zany and ridiculous.
It's true. And certainly the story of We Will Rock You reflected the eccentricity of the songs. That's
a bit ironic about a show being so anti-commercialism and pop music, and yet here we are.
No, they all refuse their royalties, apparently. It's a anti-capitalist statement, as opposed to a royalty statement. No, it's interesting, and it's funny because working on a new musical like you are, one is doing that a bit anyway. Sometimes you say to yourself, well, there's this song, and I've written it for this character, and it has to be in the show because it's how this character sounds, and fair enough. But then what you find you're doing is almost treating that like a song in Jersey Boys. In other words, I know this song has to be there, and then how do we get there?
Make it work in the scene. Go.
Yeah. Exactly right. So, in fact, that question of dramaturgy and diegetism, whatever you like to call it.
Diagenesis.
Diagenesis.
Or diagenesis.
Then you have a barrel. And so those questions are sort of the same question in a weird sort of way. And talking about Sondheim, and the thing we talked about first, which is when do you know a show is the show? So many songs, I think, immediately have Send in the Clowns. That song came, as you know, in preview. And
a lot of the Les Mis songs came in previews as well, didn't they?
And they are unmistakably belonging to that show, and actually, interestingly, caused by that show. So Little Night Music, because it's Little Night Music, makes Send in the Clowns.
Oh, so we have a new answer. What comes first, the music or the lyrics? Neither. The show.
Well, the show, yes. And anyone who writes shows will tell you that... We had this conversation with Lee Hall the other day. I was doing this thing at the National. They've got this whole new thing of making this eugenics program of making these new musical theatre writers. And Lee Hall came and talked. And he said that there is a thing eventually, and you recognise it when you're there. It's like a relationship, like being in a relationship with another person.
Oh yes, I remember those.
It's different from dating. It isn't necessarily better or worse.
But there's no bit where you say, right, we're in a relationship.
But I think there is a bit where you say that relationship, and you do what you do because of the relationship, and not because of you or because of him or her. And similarly, a show, we were talking about this earlier, will reject a number in the same way that the human body will reject an organ transplant, because it actually has a life, an entity, and it's very mysterious. And I'm a real pragmatist about many things, but nevertheless, there is a thing called a show or a story, which, if you do enough work to it, exists. And actually, what you need to be doing then is asking the show what it needs. Or like bringing up a child. You know, if you've got a baby, if only your baby, you know your baby's screaming, is he happy or sad? You have no idea. Does it want a nappy change or a meal? You don't know. But it wants something. And I think shows are a bit like that, once you're on them. And that's why they are so rewritten. Because very often, the problem is not the show, but the writers who haven't quite seen what the show is. And very often, particularly I'm just looking at a show right now that someone sent me to look at, and the opening sequence is every sort of wrong. I just know it is. It just is. And they've written this opening sequence without...
Why won't you tell me what's wrong with it?
Well, I've told them what's wrong with it, but because the showness of it, what is this trying to do? It's why I admire, everything comes back to Sondheim, Into the Woods so much, particularly Act 1.
Once upon a time.
Yeah, Once Upon a Time, and then I Wish.
Yeah.
If you want to describe what a musical is, where are we, what do we want?
Or Tend to Tell the Sweeney Todd.
Yeah, there we are. But actually, the I wantness of it comes quite late to Sweeney.
Epiphany, isn't it? Or...
Yeah, They All Deserve to Die. But I Want songs, funnily enough, are quite absent early from... actually, we see that Sweeney Wants Revenge quite quickly. And maybe Mrs. Lovett, you see, wants
I think it's
Sweeney.
her I Want song, isn't it?
Yeah.
She wants a better pie shop.
No, she wants him.
Oh.
She wants him. I'm your friend too, Mr. Todd. If you only knew, Mr. Todd. Ooh, Mr. Todd. So she wants him, and he wants revenge. And because they have different wants, they will never be what you might call a couple. Again, Sondheim says they're like oil and water. You can shake them together, but they will always separate out. And that's why in the end of Sweeney Todd, which I admire so much, they're in different time signatures on top of each other.
Of course they are. And different keys, probably.
Yeah,
as
and
well.
different keys, you bet. And they're singing together, but they're not together at all because their wants are different. So there's not a We Want song. And that is exactly what happened in Into the Woods, interestingly. It's the I Wish song rather than I Want song. But what one person wants fucks up someone else's want. So if I want the child, I have to get these things. But if I get that, that takes away from this person, and so on. And that's why those plots intertwine so amazingly in that piece.
Is that Sondheim or James Lapine?
In Lapine. It's both. But they have decided what they're doing. And again, you can... Sondheim, again, I will always quote, Sondheim says, that piece is very easy. There are a lot of fairy tale characters, and in the middle there's this Jewish couple from Brooklyn.
And a rapping witch.
And a rapping witch, yes, a very early rapping witch. You see, Hamilton, eat your heart out.
Did you see the Merrily We Roll Along documentary?
Yes.
What did you think of that?
Oh, it was very touching. I personally felt that actually...
Talk about life imitating art.
Yes, it was actually Lonnie Price really talking about himself. Mm. And that seemed to me quite a smaller story than the big story I wanted to hear. Him looking at himself on a moviola saying, oh, look at me, I had it even then and stuff like that. Really? This isn't actually what I want to hear about. But it was very, 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 very touching indeed.
Yeah. Did you see that production?
Which one? The
original on...
No, I never did. No, I never did.
You weren't there that week.
I wasn't having a hair down that night. No, I never saw that. I saw the very first production that was in England, in Manchester, and I saw it so many times they gave me a free pass at the Wythenshawe Forum.
Funny thing happened.
Yes. Yes.
But that has an interesting framing device, which I didn't see in Maria's production at the Menier. Mm-hmm. For the younger listeners out there, explain what that framing device was, because it was in his documentary, and I thought,
yes,
what's this?
Well, that's how I know the piece, and that's how it was first performed, which is we begin with the present day, and Franklin Shepherd-Ink is addressing the newly graduated students from his college, who are basically him, because they're 18 or 19 and they have got their lives ahead of them, and they sing a song which he wrote called Behold the Hills of Tomorrow. And that's the opening of the show. And then they say to him...
Some parade.
He makes no, that's the other, there's Hills of Georgia. And they say to him, how did you get there from here, Mr. Shepherd? How did it all begin? And the show is the answer to that.
So it's his view entirely?
Yeah.
So why don't they get rid of it?
Well... There's two answers to that, one of which is true and the other one which isn't.
Do you mean?
The true answer, I think, is that the crash...
Is it too much?
The crash and burn of the show on Broadway was deeply, deeply scarring for all concerned, desperately so. For Hal Prince and Stephen Sondheim.
And ironic, considering what the piece is about.
Exactly. And it was the end of that relationship. Actually, it wasn't. They worked together later on Bounce, but
that hit.
Well, yeah, I mean that wonderful show. But they, so it was very, very scarring. And then James Lapine, who was sort of the new Hal Prince in terms of collaborators for Stephen.
Into the Woods.
Into the Woods and Passion and Sunday Park, and others. He came on board as a new director. So they directed a second production of it, and Sondheim rewrote it considerably and cut that number from it. And one of the main reasons that I personally find that quite sad, but it's a very simple one, is the music of that number. Behold the hills of tomorrow informs every number from the entire show. So we're bringing back Stiles to the White House and Who Wants to Live in New York, and it started out like a song. Basically, the idea is that music, which you hear up front, colours the whole show, and that you do lose. And the other thing you lose...
Does it open with an instrumental version? Or?
No, it opens with an overture.
Yeah.
That's the show that's licensed now does not include that. And interestingly, when Michael Brandy did the Donmar, he hadn't got that memo and did that recording, and there were, let's say, there were negotiations as a result of that. But they so I think, and the other great thing is it begins in hope and it ends in hope. And which is, for me, the most heartbreaking thing about the saddest musical ever written by anybody ever, is that it's framed with hope, because there's nothing sadder than hope.
Nothing more painful than love.
Yeah, well, love is occasionally painful and occasionally pleasurable, but hope, dashed hope, is a very painful thing. And as Fosker says in Passion, if you never have an expectation, you will never have a disappointment.
On that cheery note, Jeremy, thank you very, very much for taking the time to...
My pleasure,
talk.
always.
Always a joy, Jeremy, and we'll have you on again soon.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
For more information about Musical Talk, please visit our website at musicaltalk.co.uk. You can email us at feedback@musicaltalk.co.uk, listen to past episodes on iTunes and YouTube, and follow our social media channels on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
What did we talk about?
Oh, everything.
There we go.